Hi, everybody. Somebody's glasses here before we finish up today. Are yours, Brenda?
One-armed.
So I've really enjoyed all the presentations today, and it's really great actually to be here. So thanks very much to Brian and to Maura for the invitation. And I have to say, Maura Morgan was Leap's first follower, and I think your first follower is very significant. Maura saw in us. Where are you? I can't see you. Where is she? She's just stepped out. She probably knew I was going to say this. Maura saw in us a small kitchen table organisation with a laptop and a smartphone. She saw an idea, perhaps whose time had come, and she invested in us very early. She didn't invest a lot of money, but she did mentor us and she did believe in us, and that was really important. So when Maura comes back in, somebody please tell her that. I'm just talking about you, Maura. So my presentation today really fits in with a lot of what Martin said and a lot of what Brendan said, which is about supporting families from a really young age to orient themselves towards the ordinary and to stay in the ordinary against some very compelling advice by a plethora of professionals that may come into your life from a very young age when you have a child with a disability to step into the door marked special. Okay, so we know that if you stay on the typical or normative life path, you're more likely to connect with the good things in life. And if you stray too far into service land or into special or specialist services, the good things in life will be harder for you to obtain. So, actually, I'm working on this, and that, of course, doesn't work this. Silly me, too many gadgets. I believe that all persons with intellectual disabilities and autism and their families should have the opportunity for full inclusion and participation in community life to the same degree as other citizens in Ireland. So because of my son, myself and another woman decided that we'd set up an organisation that would support families to stay on the inclusive or normative life path. How about that? Okay, so that's what we did. We didn't have that language then, but that's what we went and did. A little bit of statistics. So a little bit of statistics. An estimated 10 to 20% of people in Ireland have a disability. 1.6 billion is spent on disability services each year. 85% of that figure is spent on staff costs. 4% of that budget is spent on families, yet 66% of people with disabilities live at home, and the majority of people with disabilities don't access disability-specific services. So what's that about? Bit of a social justice issue there, I think. So I've always been interested in what happens to people when hard times unfold. Hard times unfolded in our life, and what we needed was an invitation to belong. We didn't actually need services or medication or therapy. We needed someone to reach out and connect with us. That's what we needed. So that's what I've come to provide in LEAP to a small number of families. So we set up LEAP for the following reasons. This is going to sting maybe some people in the room, but however, I'll press on. Unresponsive service providers, poor life outcomes, and perpetual clienthood. Confused provider values, for example, personal choice and inclusion. A difficulty finding services and supports for individuals, particularly individuals with complex so-called disabilities. A lack of individualization and personalization by providers, and a negative view of the role of families in the lives of people. that one really annoys me. That one really annoys me, the way that sometimes service providers and clinicians and other types of professionals almost seem to have great glee in divorcing the person from their family. What's that about? What's that about? We've got to work together. We've got to work together. So this is a lovely quote that I always come back to by the Chinese philosopher, I think he was Chinese, Lao Tzu. Being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. So we in LEAP draw out the love, courage and commitment of families towards a vision of an ordinary life for their family member with a disability and for themselves. So I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. But first, we might just define what inclusion is. So this is a definition from something called social role valorization. A man called Wolf Wolfensberger, many people here might have studied his work or be familiar with his work, a brilliant man. So he said, we know a person is included when they are engaged and positively valued in an environment typical of their age, peers, and culture. So it's a really good definition. So, you know, if we're throwing a birthday party for an 18-year-old man who lives in Mullingar, which is part of the country I live in, we'd ask, you know, what are other young men in Mullingar doing on their 18th birthday? What is typical? What is optimal? Well, let's do that. So that's quite a good yardstick. But how is inclusion achieved? We might be able to define it, but how is it achieved? And why do some people enjoy a rich, meaningful life, as Madeline was saying, and many others do not? Now, this is where I suppose I would see things differently, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a little while. So there's a quote here from a friend of mine called Jeremy Ward. And Jeremy says that he's also a parent. The reality is that the full and positive lives of people with disabilities that we hear and read about do not happen by accident. These inspirational stories can be told because someone had a vision and belief in what is possible, sometimes against considerable opposition, and planned to make it happen. So what are the supports that families need to get their child, to springboard their child, like we've all done, those of us who are parents in this room, into ordinary life opportunities, valued opportunities? And for parents with children with disabilities, a lot of what we find is that they need some emotional support. So services and early intervention have their place, absolutely, but families need two things. They need to see it to believe it, and they need to believe it to see it. So as a network, we can do a couple of things. We can be there, we can show them the path by walking it. Some of us would already have children living independently, working, and so on and so forth. So just by sharing those stories of success with other families and saying, look, this is what was achieved in this family, families find that very reassuring, very encouraging. So I suppose we believe in the importance of family leadership, both individually and collectively. And this is a key slide. In the last 25 years, I think we've seen very little significant improvement in the lives of people with intellectual disabilities and autism globally, but let's just speak about Ireland. And we've seen some rapid change in many social movements, and I've listed a number of them there. Marriage equality. Many parents of children with disabilities felt that they were delighted to see the marriage equality movement achieve its aims with such huge support right through politics and government, including our own Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. Black Lives Matter, we can see that that's been a very, very powerful collaboration of voices. The Me Too movement started in 2005, really kind of clarified around Weinstein and so on. And now Greta Thunberg, a young woman from Sweden, who's leading out the school strike for climate, which again is a global, sending a global ripple across the world. Why have we not been able to see in the lives of people with intellectual disabilities and autism such support from community members? Why is that? Well, I did a slide, in fact I did 3 and then I cut them out because I won't go into the why. We could be here all day about the why. A part of it is to do with societal devaluation and unconsciousness and so on and so forth. We could nearly do a whole day on that, couldn't we? But certainly what we believe is, who are the advocates for families, for individuals with intellectual disabilities and families? If they get their heads around what the problem is they're trying to solve, and it's the good life question, it is their family members. They love their child. They will be there, they will do more for longer. So as I say again, we harness the love, courage and commitment of families towards the good life for their family member. And I hear you, Brian, when you talk about your sister being your mirror and bringing around dinners you neither need or want. We're not talking about that either. We're talking about the person very much being at the centre of the vision. And if they don't need it, and you clearly don't, and many others in the national platform clearly don't, then we as family members need to back off and know when to back off. So I wanted to make that very clear. So some people have already talked about inclusive education, and we believe in LEAP that an inclusive life begins with an inclusive education. And we'd really like to see one common learning area for all students. And we're delighted to see the introduction of the LINK programme, so that now all children with or without disabilities will get 2 years of free preschool, the early childhood education scheme. And if a child has a disability, they can now attend those 2 years, those free preschool years, with a range of supports provided through the LINK scheme. So if you don't know about that, have a look at it. It's Dr. Ema Ring from Mary I is leading out on that, and it's fabulous. So now the National Council for Special Education realise that they have to look at national schooling being fully inclusive, secondary schooling being fully inclusive, and then post-secondary. LEAP took 8 families to Canada this time last year, where we saw firsthand what post-secondary inclusive education looks like. They've got over themselves in Canada. It's not about getting a diploma, a certificate or a degree. You go to university to belong. You go to university for an experience. Yes, you learn, but you don't have to matriculate. You don't have to come out with a degree. They've really got their heads around it. It's wonderful. So when we talk about inclusion increasingly, we're talking about inclusion for everybody, whether you've become through the aging process marginalised, whether you're a migrant or new to the country, perhaps a refugee or asylum seeker, whether you're LGBTI, whether you're young and disabled. Inclusion is for everybody. We've got to stop having this conversation just in the disability space. Would you agree? Nolene is putting her fingers up, so it's time for me to finish. We'd simply say what needs to happen in 2030. Well, it needs to happen now. Invest in families, take the focus off therapy and programs. Why do we keep putting programs at the centre of disabled people's lives? Incentivize success with families. For example, provide small micro budgets to families to use to support typical and ordinary life goals. This builds the confidence, the competence, and the commitment of families towards inclusion. Place the focus on a child's current situation and on creating the conditions for success. So in LEAP, we simply connect with families. We ask, what does a good life look like, rather than what services do you need? We work really hard to build relationships, because on our deathbeds, none of us will say, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. We'll all say, do you know, I wish I'd gone to Italy and caught up with that old friend of mine and spent time hanging out with that boy I fell in love with, and whatever we're going to say. That's what we say. It's always about relationships. We then build individual family leadership. We build the capacity and the vision of the family towards the ordinary. We teach them to discern the options from special that they're being given. We then invite participation at wider level. I'm going to embarrass my lovely friend Fiona, who's in the room now. Fiona came to an event of LEAPS last summer in Dublin. She then came back to a one-day workshop in Galway earlier this year, then joined us for a 3-day workshop and spent time with us socially. She's now coming to observe us at a board meeting in Athenry tomorrow. So we try and assist families to step up and step out from behind their whole door into wider leadership opportunities. And all of this with very, very few resources. So this is the last slide. The ongoing social change required to enable children and adults with disabilities to live meaningful, inclusive lives is primarily dependent on continuously revitalized family leadership. There's a pressing need for us to attract new potential family leaders and develop their capacity to contribute to collective family leadership. Sorry, I lied to you. Disability services are not able to deliver on the promise of a good or enviable life for the many. We believe we have broached the limits and capacity of disability services, and that they are not sustainable or readily transformable. We are trying to solve the wrong problem. Thank you very much.